Welcome back to another Daily Drop here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me for another return visit. It was so fun last Friday. We got so much positive feedback from having the one and only Brett Friedlander on with us. So he is back. Brett Friedlander from Saturday Road, and he's a legendary ACC writer. He's covered so much stuff, not just the ACC, but all pro championships. So Brett, we're going to dive into two things here with the ACC. We're going to hit a little basketball first, and then we're going to go football, which is the main topic for today. But there is no way on God's green earth I can do a podcast with you today without bringing up the ACC basketball schedule that came out on Tuesday night. And Jacob and I did a pod right after it came out, and I kind of let the league have it over the moronic scheduling of 5 conference games the day of the ACC championship game. And before you comment, the SEC has no conference games that day. 3 teams play their non-conference games and are all early. The Big Ten has Illinois at Rutgers, so they knew, decades in advance, there's nothing there, that not like Illinois or Rutgers going to play in the Big Ten championship football game. Big 12 has no conference games that day. ACC has 5. And this is what's interesting. Notre Dame at Miami on the CW. Syracuse at Virginia, ESPN2. They had a slot. Duke at Georgia Tech on the CW. Florida State at North Carolina, 2 schools that very likely could be playing football that night in Charlotte. Mm-hmm. They're at 2 p.m. on the ACC network. Then NC State at Boston College at 4 o'clock on the ACC network. So what are your thoughts about the moronic scheduling of ACC basketball on the day of the championship game?
It's not just a full schedule on the day of the championship game. It's the first full schedule. It's the first conference games of the season. It's nuts. It's obviously TV generated. And if you want to look at it and put a positive spin on it, it's a great lead in because you're spending that whole day with the ACC, right? And the NC State Boston College game is at 4 o'clock. So barring multiple overtimes, you can watch the game and still have time to go get dinner and just kind of, chill a little bit before the kickoff of the football game. But it's just crazy because what it does is it takes attention away from it, because guess what? There are going to be other championship football games on that day, and people aren't unless you're the specific fan of those schools and care about basketball in December. And there's a very slim audience that does that. Okay. You're not going to be paying attention to it because you're going to be watching the SEC game. You're going to be watching the Big Ten game. I don't understand it, but it's, it's the ACC, and I am convinced that Jim Phillips is the real life college version of Rachel Phillips, Rachel Phelps, who, by the way, is the owner of the Cleveland Indians in the movie Major League, who did everything in her power to make the team stink so that she could move them. I think that maybe they're sabotaging the league so that it'll go away and it'll get absorbed by others. I don't know, but that's the only explanation I can for some of the decisions that these people are making.
I love having you on. I love talking to you, but you just forced an image into my head of, conference coaches pulling a layer off of a Jim Phillips cutout in a bathing suit. We don't want that.
No, we do not.
Oh my gosh. In all seriousness, a league that is still dealing with the perception that it's basketball first. And I say this because last night I was looking at something where Danny Cannell tweeted out something about the ACC has 6 4-0 teams for the first time ever. And the comments, and sometimes I like to read the comments because it gives you an idea what people think and what perceptions are. And a lot of people, basketball league, it doesn't matter, basketball league. Well, nothing speaks about basketball league first more than 5 conference games the day of your conference championship when the other leagues are playing their championships. And then, when you put the schedule out at the end of September and who's doing well, that Florida State, North Carolina could very likely play in football that night in Charlotte. But let's go ahead and throw them in Chapel Hill that afternoon in basketball. And then it's late enough that there's no way fans could attend both games. It's the epitome of simply not connecting dots I'll say in Charlotte now because they're no longer in Greensboro. That's another topic for another day. But it just tells me that there's a disconnect there, and they're not thinking about the fans. They're not thinking about the teams, and they're not thinking about perception here.
They're not thinking about anything except for how are we going to get more money, because we have to compete with the Big Ten and the SEC. And right now the money, or the biggest stream of money, is coming in from TV. And so the one-eyed monster calls the shots. And like you said, the CW, I mean, first of all, it's the CW, for crying out loud. But, 2 games, and that speaks to, we sold ourselves to the devil here to make sure that these games are on TV once the whole Bally thing fell through. And, they're basically the cart rather than the horse.
I guess that was the one way they could get Duke on the CW, was slot him in.
And by the way,
and it's probably a deal they made with the CW. It's like, hey, we'll give you Duke. It'll be this. They get 2 games that day, 2 ACC conference games.
You talk about Duke on the CW. Duke is on the CW 3 times this season. Okay, that Georgia Tech game that's on the same day as the championship. I haven't
looked at their part of the schedule. That's surprising.
If you go on our site on my post today about the takeaways from the schedule, you'll see. But anyway, Duke is on 3 times. That Georgia Tech game, the day of the championship football game, once against Queens and once against Charlotte. So 2 non-conference games that otherwise would never be interesting on TV anyway. And that one game on a day where who cares? Carolina, by the way, is only on the CW once. And that's, I believe, January 3rd against Boston College.
Wow.
And the teams that are on there most, 5 times. Okay. Louisville, Virginia Tech, NC State, and I want to say Syracuse maybe. But yeah, it's
interesting because those are 3 basketball fan bases that will watch their basketball. I mean, Louisville, Syracuse are next tier from the Blue Bloods. Although somebody at ESPN or wherever thought Syracuse was a blue blood when they did blue blood blue blood schools with unbeaten football teams, they included Syracuse in that.
Well, they were blue blood about 10 years ago.
Yeah, they were close. Yeah, for sure. They're in that next tier. Anyway, let's dive into football.
Yeah.
And by the way, before we get going, tell everybody where they can find your stuff.
SaturdayRoad.com, or you can check me out on the platform formerly known as Twitter at BeFriedACC. That's BeFried, FRIED ACC.
Yeah, a couple of us in the North Carolina media just referred to you as BeFried. You're not there. When we talk about you behind your back, it's BeFried.
Hey, also, listen, when you talk about me behind my back, there have been a lot worse. So
it's usually pretty good stuff. I'm
sure it is.
And a quick reminder, this drop is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. We'll have something from them a little bit later. Okay, football. There are 3 games this weekend that I want to highlight, and I'm going to highlight them, I think, because they're relevant games for the league. They're important games, but they're also relevant to North Carolina because that is what we do here. We talk about North Carolina primarily, although I do think that Carolina fans have a very strong interest in the league, which is why we're doing a little bit more ACC stuff now with our pods and some of our writing. So I'm going to ask you about these 3 games. Tell me what you think very quickly about the game and then the relevance of that game to North Carolina. So we're going to start Friday night. I think it's a very interesting game, and I think it's a must win. It's a must play well, I would say, for NC State. And I guess if you play well against Louisville at home, you should beat Louisville, right?
You should. And as far as a must game is concerned, I don't think it is at this point yet, but
must play well.
But if NC State doesn't win this game, the margin for error to get 6 wins and get into a bowl becomes extremely thin. So I think this is a game that they really, really need to win because their schedule gets pretty tough. They play Florida State still. They play Duke still. They play Carolina still. So, there are games that, that they need to win, and this is one of them. And the other on the other side, Louisville is 4-0. and is really kind of, become a darling because Jeff Brom, and they're putting up huge offensive numbers. But NC State is by far the best team that they will have played at this point. And it's a game that I believe it's their ACC. No, they beat Georgia Tech in that first game. But if they can,
then they just beat BC too. They're 2-0 in the league.
So they're 2-0 in the ACC. If they win this game, they're 3-0 in the ACC. They do not play Clemson. They do not play Florida State. They do not play Carolina. So at 3-0 in the ACC, without having to play those three teams, the path to get to the ACC championship game is absolutely there for them. Not that they're that good of a team, but it's there. All they had to do is take care of business. And so we will find out how good or not good Louisville actually is on Friday. I think the Wolfpack's in trouble. And I think the reason that I say the Wolfpack is in trouble has nothing to do with Robert and I, nothing to do with Brennan Armstrong or their offense. It's their defense. And the defense has been good. It's still a formidable defense. But the one thing they've had problems with all season is giving up big plays. They've been burned by big plays, even against Virginia. Darn near lost that because of the big plays that they gave up. Nobody has had more big plays of 20 yards or more this season than the Louisville Cardinals so far. Jawar Jordan has, I believe, 4 touchdown runs of over 70 yards already this season. Wow. Jamari Thrash is a bunch of chunk plays. So NC State has a potential to get really chopped up with the big play. And so I think this is going to be a really difficult game for them.
Yeah, they have Plummer pushing it vertically a lot. The relevance to North Carolina here, I think Carolina fans need to root for NC State on 2 fronts here. Number one, I'm going to repeat this constantly. You want the toughest possible schedule for the Tar Heels. You want to be able to score as many points by getting wins over good teams as possible. And that game at the end of the year, you want it to matter enough that there'll be a lot of eyeballs on it if it's a huge game for the Tar Heels. Number 2, you got to find losses in there for Louisville. Clemson took its second league loss. I'm not going to say the Tigers are taken care of because that's incumbent upon the Tar Heels to win, to not lose another game and then lose to Clemson and and lose the tiebreaker to them. But Louisville is the outlier here. They're the club that could sneak into the title game, as you said, and then they'll go play Florida State and Charlotte and lose 55-30 or something like that.
55-20.
Or maybe not. But I think Carolina fans need to root for NC State on those 2 fronts here. Louisville needs a loss. They need to lose. And Carolina needs more good teams on the slate.
I agree 100%. Like I said, they're already 3. If they win that game, they're already 3-0 in the league. And their toughest games aren't on their schedule.
No, they're really not. Clemson at Syracuse at noon. I think this is a very interesting game because the Tigers have had trouble up there. Mm-hmm. For some reason, they just don't play well up there. They lost on a Friday night there one time, and I don't know what it is.
Wasn't it the Chase Bryce game too? They up there that they were down.
The Chase Bryce game was in Death Valley when he came in and led them to a win. They were losing that game. They should have lost. They were
Trevor Lawrence got hurt.
Yeah, but they went up there on a Friday night one time and lost, and they've struggled up there before. That place will be full, and when that place is full for football, it's a totally different animal. Yep. Like if Syracuse can ever get to the point where that place is full and they're optimistic and they believe, then they suddenly have a great home field advantage. Back in the 90s, that was an incredible home field advantage they had there. This game is important because Carolina plays both teams. Okay. But I think the Syracuse side here is far more important for North Carolina simply because Syracuse goes to Chapel Hill the next week and then they go to Florida State. So Carolina gets Syracuse as a sandwich game. That helps the Tar Heels coming off of an open date. So do you think it's better for UNC that Syracuse wins and elevates who they are, or Clemson gets a win and doesn't become completely dismissed by the national media? So if Carolina goes to Death Valley and wins, it won't get nearly the attention we thought it would before the season.
Yeah, a Clemson loss wouldn't just get them dismissed by the national media. I think that would put them in danger of just throwing in the towel because they've got a lot of guys who came back for a 6th year specifically to get to the playoff. And at that point, if they're 0-3 in the league, there are going to be some guys that say, you know what, I'm not going to hurt my draft stock. What is this? What am I doing this for? And either go through the motions or shut it down, or it will be really interesting to see what happens in that case. I don't think that's going to happen, however, because I think Syracuse is an enormous fraud. If you look at their non-conference schedule, it's even lighter than Louisville's. And then you factor in that Garrett Schrader is doing this basically on his own. The one viable weapon that he had, Oronde Godson the third, is gone. He has a foot injury. He's out for the rest of the season. And if you look, that game against Purdue, he had like 400 yards, and that's not an exaggeration. He had just about 400 yards between his passing and his rushing, and scored, or accounted for 5 touchdowns. So, I don't think one guy is beating Clemson. Now, is Clemson going to beat itself? Well, I mean, look at the body of work. They beat themselves against Duke, and while they played a probably their best game. No, they played definitely their best game of the year against Florida State. I was there in Death Valley last Saturday, and they were really good. But the two things that have haunted them all season, okay, the turnover at the wrong possible time and the kicking game bit them again. And these are problems now that are recurring errors that at 5 games now into the season, I don't know that you're going to fix them. This is their personality. You can get away with that against Charleston Southern, which they did. But you can't against good teams that they've lost to. So, even though it was just the one turnover, it was a disaster turnover, and it happened at the wrong time. And then Dabo bringing in a kicker off the street to and throwing him out there to try to kick a game-winning field goal was just. It was doomed to failure, and it's a desperation move. I mean, you've got other kickers in your program. Okay, this kid that they've got that was inconsistent is an elite recruit. Work with him or develop somebody else. When you bring somebody off the street like that, I mean, literally 3 days before the game. That smacks of desperation, and so that
it squashes that kid. Yeah, it squashes that kid's confidence too.
Absolutely. So
I think that thing might be spiraling for the rest of the season, just because they played well at home and still lost. But Brett, they played well at home and still lost. They're not used to that. They don't know how to handle this right now.
I get that, but they're going to be a desperate team on Saturday, and this is it. This is the last hurrah, because if they lose this, I think they toss it in.
Desperate teams make mistakes.
Well, but and they're prone to it. So, but I think they're still going to win this game, because I don't think Syracuse is that.
So what's the best case scenario for North Carolina?
Oh, I think Syracuse winning. Oh, I think Syracuse winning, because if you get 2 5-0 or a 4-0 team and a 5-0 team playing, number one, the national media is going to watch it. They're going to comment on it, and it's going to
Syracuse will get ranked too. Syracuse get ranked.
So, but if it's Carolina against a team that just got waxed by Clemson, it's like meh.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it elevates the value of a win over Syracuse, and I still think no matter what Clemson does, if Carolina goes to Death Valley a week before Thanksgiving, gets a win there, that's still going to carry some weight. Eyeballs will be on that game. NC State, Notre Dame is at Duke. I don't know, I was thinking NC State. Notre Dame is at Duke Saturday night. Game day's there. All that stuff is awesome. I think it's phenomenal for the ACC, phenomenal for Duke. But the important thing here is very quickly, how do you see this game going? And this is, again, I'm going to tell Carolina fans, I know you don't want to root for State Friday. I know you don't want to root for Duke, but you're going to have to, because it's better for the Tar Heels moving forward if the Wolfpack win and if the Blue Devils shock Notre Dame and really become a national player with a win if they get a win Saturday night.
Here's the thing. They're going to shock the nation, okay? They're going to shock people who haven't seen them play. But after they beat Clemson and the way they beat Clemson, a win it won't shock me. Do I think it's going to happen?
But a lot of people don't believe.
I know they're still, hey, listen, wait a minute. Basketball season doesn't start for another month. It's
that talk.
But with Duke, you understand why, because they're playing this game in the shadow of Cameron Indoor Stadium, the Cameron Crazies, John Shire, right? All the banners. I mean, this is Duke football. You remember about 10 years ago, just before Cutcliffe showed up, they bailed out of a contract to play Louisville, which was not in the ACC at the time. Louisville sued, and a judge in Kentucky ruled that Duke was the worst football program in Division I, and that anybody that Louisville got to replace them on the schedule was equal or greater value. Do you remember that? Well, that's what people were thinking about Duke. They're not that way anymore. Mike Elko has come in and really done a great job. And I think you saw, even though they were playing Ohio State last week, I think you saw some chinks in the armor of Notre Dame, especially in its organization, in its preparedness. I mean, you're down. First of all, they should never have given up a play to the 1 yard line on 3rd and 19 with the game on the line. But even so, how do you get caught with 10 men on the field for the last play of the game? I mean, these are things that are structural things that are, it's a coaching thing. And I think that Mike Elko and his staff are much better prepared, much better organized, and much better coaches. And I think that they can scheme and game plan to take advantage of Notre Dame's deficiencies. I also think the fact that they've played Sam Hartman and beat Sam Hartman last year helps too, because even though this is a different offense, they know where he likes to go. They know how long he likes to hold on to the ball. And by the way, all the talk about, Sam Hartman so cool under pressure. Look at him last week in the fourth quarter and late in the third quarter against Ohio State. I don't think he was so cool under pressure. Also, look at the Louisville game last year in the third quarter when he turned the ball over 3 times, including 2 pick sixes. I think he could be rattled, and I think that Duke has the defensive front and the secondary to do that. So. The other thing is there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of attention. This is a big deal off the field. Now, at a lot of places, that will be a distraction that will take the players' focus away from the game. Duke has already proven with that Clemson circus that they are oblivious to that they can block that out and still play an incredibly focused game, stick with the game plan and do what they have to do. And I think that this is going to be an incredibly close game. I think Duke's got a shot at winning. Do I think they will? I probably don't. But if they can get a turnover or two, I think that this is a game that they can steal. Yeah, the Clemson game was a hell of a dress rehearsal. And by the way, with this weekend. And by the way, AJ, it's not just a big game for Carolina fans because because it would make Duke a much more formidable opponent. But this is a game that everybody in the ACC needs to be on Duke's side and rooting for them. Notre Dame has not lost to an ACC team since 2017 in the regular season, since 2017. Somebody's got to break this streak. Okay. I was thinking that Clemson later on, at Death Valley, that was when it was going to happen. But after watching Clemson last week at Death Valley, I'm not so sure anymore. This may be their best chance. And so take advantage of it because somebody's got to do it. All right. So which of the 6 unbeatens not named Florida State stays unbeaten the longest? I think the Tar Heels do. I think the Tar Heels are 9-0 going into that last 3-game gauntlet. That means beating Miami in a few weeks. Yes, it does. They're playing at home. I think what I like about Miami is even good Miami teams in the past have toyed around with bad teams every once in a while, and they'll have an ugly 30-14 kind of 30-17 win over a bad team. They're thumping people. I thought the way they went up to Temple and thumped them showed that this is a focused Miami team as opposed to the in and out focus of the past. Yep, so that was Middle Tennessee waiting to happen because they were on the road for the first time. And it didn't. Yeah, exactly. They were on the road for the first time. The weather was miserable. There was nobody in the stands, and so it was there for a flop. And they just came out and roared. But I just Carolina's. That's defense. About Duke too. Duke did the same thing at UConn. I thought that going up there and pounding them the way they did showed that it's a very focused group. Yep. So Miami, to me, I think Miami is different. Now, is Miami what people think Miami should always be? I'm not sure yet because I don't think that A&M's good. A&M is Miami light. A&M and Miami are the same team. I mean,
I think Miami's coaches.
Well, they are.
Miami's first huge test, I think, is going to be in Chapel Hill.
It is. I mean, I think both teams are going to be undefeated when they come there. And you know what? College game day might show up. I mean, it's going to be a big deal because at that point, who's going to be the best of the rest behind Florida State? And that's going to determine it.
Carolina could play. What's wild is Carolina could play 2 games this year to determine that, and neither one of them are against Clemson.
Nope. But the thing I'm saying though is that Carolina's defense has gotten to the point where I think that they're going to be able to hold that Miami offense down enough for Drake and those guys now that they just seem to be finding their rhythm. You know, they brought back Nate McCollum 2 weeks ago, and that kind of opened things up for everybody, even though Nate had those 15 catches. Well, now all of a sudden, after another week of practice, they started spreading the ball around more. Nate had 5 catches, but J.J. Jones was the leading receiver, and Kobe Pacer made some catches. And I just think that they keep evolving. This offense continues to get better every week, and I just think that by the time they play Miami, they're going to be running at full bore. And with the defense being the way it is, although they're going to give up some points, they're not great, but they're good enough that they're going to make it a lot easier for that offense to outscore people and to win games.
But those points they give up are in the first half. And
that says something about Chizik and the adjustments that they're making and the quality and the smarts of the people that they have brought in to be able to accept these adjustments and execute them the way they have.
I think it's a Cedric Gray thing, and I think it's a Kamen Rucker thing, and I think it's an Elijah Huzzy Power Eccles thing. I think they're very smart on that side of the ball. These are guys that are smart off the field, and they're very smart and dialed in, and they're football junkies on the field. In the 3 games against Power 5 teams, the defense has given up 2 field goals.
Mm-hmm.
That's impressive. Think about Minnesota's last 4 possessions. They had 46 yards. Pitt scored touchdowns on their first 2 drives. Their last 10 possessions, they had 3 points and 150 yards.
Yep.
I mean, look, they gave up some yards to South Carolina because they had a decent lead, and they were not in a prevent, but they were giving
by the way,
cushion,
they've got a receiver,
and they still kept them from scoring.
And South Carolina's got a receiver that leads the country in receiving yards too. So
I think right now you could argue that 4 games into the season that their quarterback might be the best quarterback in the SEC too. So they did that to a damn good quarterback who will be a first-round pick. So do you think do you think the Tar Heels are going to trend getting better more after the adjustment period? Do you think that's more who they are? Or are they the club that kind of looks bad defensively for a chunk, but then they figure things out? And where do you think this defense is moving forward?
Well, I think they're more toward the adjustment side, but it's a matter of being more consistent and starting and maybe, I don't know, game planning a little bit differently. I don't know, but I just think that, they have shown what they can be. Now it's a matter of implementing it for an entire game rather than just the second half.
Yeah. Before we continue, because I want to ask you a question about Drake, about pushing the ball down the field and some other things about the Tar Heels. But before we do that, let's go ahead and hear a word from our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy.
Yes, guys, we are so excited to be partnered with Underdog Fantasy. And we decided to partner with Underdog because it's the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and it's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry right now as well. And Underdog Fantasy has so much to offer, including their Pick'em game. And in Pick'em, you pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in the Sweets game for a chance to win big. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players and choose whether they'll go higher or lower. And you can 20x your money by going just 5 for 5. They also have a Best Ball Mania. If you think you know football, you need to check this one out. This year's Best Ball Mania has $15 million in total prizes up for grabs, with the winner taking home $3 million. So sign up today with the promo code HEEL, HEEL, and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with that promo code HEAL to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms do apply. And if you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-522-4700 or visit ncpgambling.org. Back to the show.
All right, Brett, something that I've talked about this week especially, and Jacob and I did a drop. We actually recorded it after our three things. I was in the stadium still. We recorded at 2 a.m. Sunday morning when I was still in the stadium, about three things the Tar Heels need to fix. I won't get into the first two, but the third thing I put in there was that what needs to be fixed is they need to ride Drake more. I don't think they're riding Drake enough. I think he needs to chuck it down the field. I think he needs to throw those 15 to 20 yard bullets over the middle. And they need, if you've got a great scorer, you got to get him a lot of shots. And I don't think they're getting Drake enough shots in the basketball parlance. So what are your thoughts about how Drake's been used the first four games? And do you anticipate that they're going to be more proactive with him just slinging the thing as they move forward?
Well, first of all, I think you had a great analogy when we talked a few weeks ago that you said that they have Steph Curry, but instead of letting him fire up three-pointers, they're posting him up in the paint. But I think that they're changing. I think they're evolving, and they're kind of getting more toward that. He took a few shots against Pittsburgh. I mean, there were a couple of balls over the top that I believe there was one to Nesbitt that he hit him deep. There was one to JJ. Yeah, yep. Maybe it was Copenhagen, not Nesbitt, but
it was a flea flicker to Copenhagen where he got his bell rung. Literally, he had a ringing in his ear for the next 2 hours.
But I mean, so they're starting to take some shots, but I think some of it is the influence of Chip Lindsey. I mean, Mac brought him in to make the offense more diverse and to highlight the running game a little bit more, and it's succeeded. Omarion Hampton is, I believe, the second leading rusher in the ACC, right behind Jordan from Louisville. But you're right. But I think it's a work in progress. I think that you're seeing more, especially now that that Nate McCollum's introduction into the lineup has opened things up for everybody. Not just Drake, but everybody on the outside. And it just makes defenses more, conscious of other things. You have to be conscious of the running game. Now you have to be conscious of where that slot guy is. And so that's going to leave people open on the perimeter. So I just think that they're still kind of figuring this thing out. And I would expect them to take more shots. I would expect them to start throwing the ball downfield more because it's going to be there more.
Yeah. Well, in the first two games, 16 of Drake's 62 passes with 10 or more yards downfield. In the last two, 28 of 72 passes or 70 passes has. So they went from 25% throwing the ball 10 yards or more to about 41%. So we're seeing that. And I agree with you. I think we're going to see a little bit more of it. He's just so good at that. When their offense is hummed and looked like, okay, this group's in sync and they're marching down the field, it's when they're throwing over the middle. Yep. They've gotten stuck in a lot of first and long situations or second and long situations because they haven't been real good running the ball at first down. And to be honest with you about Omarion Hampton, 234 yards against App. In the 3 games against Power 5, he's got 47 carries for 149 yards. So I'm not so sure they are a good running team just yet.
British Brooks had over 100 against South Carolina, though.
He did, but Hampton had 37 yards on 16 carries that game. So I think that the jury is still out on what kind of a running team this is. And also pass protection, 5 sacks the other night. I think Willie Lampkin's a big part of this. First 2 games, 2 sacks, and they had big-time rushing numbers. Lampkin's missed the last 2 games, 7 sacks, and the rushing numbers have been poor. And I do think Lampkin is the best offensive lineman on this team. He is the quintessential road grader guard. And when you have a road grader guard and a good center, there are a lot of things you can do with your offensive line and your run game. And their inside run game has not been very good the last 2 weeks. And I think that's also why they got to ride Drake. I think they can run it well enough, especially when he's part of that. I know that Carolina fans don't want him taking hits, but he's a part of the run game. Mm-hmm. He's not Garrett Schrader, but he's a part of the run game, and he can take a hit. He can take a hit and get up and keep playing. But I really believe that for this team to be what they can, they've got to ride that arm more than they have.
The App game, though, I think that what Omarion did in that game when people are scouting Carolina and they see that on film, the deterrent of having a guy who can do that, still, even if they haven't really rushed that well the last couple of games, it still helps the rest of the offense, because you have to be cognizant, because if you don't, if you load up to stop Drake, they've got a guy who can take advantage of it. So I still think it's
look at how Minnesota played him.
Yeah.
I mean, PJ Fleck knows what the heck he's doing, and he loaded up to stop the run with Drake Maye there. And what did Drake do? He threw for the most yards he has in Kenan Stadium. So that is a good thing, because you have one or the other. But I do think, unless I'm just not sure about the run game, but I'm going to say it again. I think they need to use Drake's arm.
Oh, I agree.
A bunch of dudes who can catch. Go to 12, 13 personnel, run those tight ends out there. All three tight ends can catch the ball downfield, and they could keep moving downfield. They have such a luxury at tight end. And I think they need to utilize that more. And you can use them in the downfield passing game. They're not just 5 yards over the middle crossover tight ends that people think about the perception what tight ends are. These are all downfield players. Kamari Morales is a downfield player. Nesbitt is basically a wide receiver in a tight end's body. And John Copenhaver has consistently proven that he can get downfield. He can beat DBs, linebackers, nickels, whoever's on him, get downfield and catch the ball. I think they need to head in that direction more.
They also now have three wide receivers who are viable. Because McCollum, Jones, and Paysour have all now shown over the last 2 weeks that they could contribute, and that, that whole narrative about, well, the receiving core is just really not very good, it's very thin, I think now has been addressed.
Yeah. Well, the J.J. Jones factor, he is consistently beating corners now, getting inside them on those post routes.
And catching the ball.
Yeah, and it's something he wasn't doing before. And another really, really smart guy. So I think that what he's done the last 2 weeks, he's got 12 catches. He's got 11 catches for over 200 yards the last 2 weeks. So if that's who J.J. Jones is moving forward, I think that's another reason that Drake Maye's got to sit back there, go through his progression, and know that there's always a damn good tight end that's going to get open, and he could dump it to him at the very least, or he could be the first option downfield with McCollum coming under. You got Jones running a post on the other side. I think they could be more explosive than they have been, Brett.
Oh, I think they can too. And like I said, I think it's an evolution. I think, a new offensive coordinator, kind of a new scheme. And I think that it is still kind of feeling itself out. I think that you'll see that eventually.
All right, this is a long drop, but I got to ask you one more thing since I got you here, and I know Carolina fans would want me to ask this. What part of this team has surprised you the most, and do you think is a part of who they are? Like, it's not, well, they've been pretty good in this area for a month, but they may not keep it up. What part of this team do you think is a surprise? And, this is who they are. They're going to be good in that area the rest of the way.
Without question, it's the secondary. They cleaned house. I mean, they brought in 6 guys, and they brought in the 6 right guys. And the thing about it is, what's that? 4 right guys. That's right. Yeah. But the thing that they lost 6, they brought in 4, but they brought in the right 4 guys. And what they've done too is those 4 guys have rubbed off on the holdovers, and they're playing so much better. I cannot say enough about Elijah Huzzie. This guy is just a playmaker. You look at his stats last year, he had 6 picks. He was, I think he was the second highest rated defensive back in FCS. And you say, it was FCS. Well, if you're a playmaker, you're a playmaker. It doesn't matter who you're doing it against. And this guy has really just, the Pitt game was the Elijah Huzzie game. And I think that's not an aberration. I think that's the norm. I just think that they're aggressive, they're deep, and they're also getting help from the guys up front who are putting more pressure. Even though they haven't had a lot of sacks since the South Carolina game, they're putting enough pressure on quarterbacks that's helping out the secondary. But those guys are really, really good. It's an incredible upgrade from last year, and I think this is who they are.
And they're getting healthier. Stick Lane is back, but he's catching up with the communication. Will Hardy, by the time Syracuse game comes, should be about where he needs to be as well. Yeah, the Armani Chapman feel-good stuff. I'll tell you another thing. You said something about rubbing off. I agree with you. I think Don Chapman is the perfect example of that. He's been consistent.
Yes,
consistency in their secondary was never a thing before.
Nope. I mean, you could see it with him last year. It flashes, but it was just more times than not, he would make a great play and then get toasted.
Yeah, that was pretty much the theme throughout that secondary, but it's not now. I agree with you. And I think, and I go back, Jacob and I did something on our football show. You got Kamen Rucker, super smart, balls out football player. Mm-hmm. Power Eccles, super smart football player, balls out football player. Cedric Gray, same thing. Elijah has the same thing. Des Evans is playing consistent football for the first time in his life. And Evans is going to be in an NFL camp next year. You're getting solid. I do think they could be better up front. I think Miles Murphy can play better than he has. Travis Shaw can play better than he has. I think Jahvaree Ritchie, I think those three have probably not played as well as anticipated, yet they're still getting a lot of good stuff up front. And I think the edge has been strong. Rucker is doing a great job setting the edge as a jack, which is his number one responsibility. And when they bring in defensive ends, Cowan gets after the quarterback. Atkin hits the quarterback every game, Atkinson, and he's only playing 12 to 15 snaps. Think about how good that dude's going to be in a year or two. So they're so much better on the edge now than they have been before. How many wheel routes have been completed against this team? Last year, wheel routes were completed
every game.
Every other series or every series. It was a constant. I can't recall any being completed this year.
I think this was one in the South Carolina game early.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was early in that game, and I think there was an adjustment. And
what's his name? JoJo or whatever.
Yeah. That's a cool name. That's a great name, actually. but so I think it's been a pretty clean defense. And I think it's going to get cleaner. They hit more. They have taken it to heart. When Max said back in the spring, we've got to change the soft narrative. And I've said this 687 times, and I'll say it a 688th time. The thing that struck me the most about when Max said that is he didn't dismiss it. He didn't deflect against it and say, well, no, that's not accurate. He said, we have to change it. Because he knew it was true. They need to be more physical. And we've seen that.
You know what changing that narrative does too? It kind of filters over to the opposing offense, because you don't go into a game saying we're going to just go balls out. We're just going to take shots because these guys are vulnerable. We're just going to go in there and just be really, really aggressive. You have to be a little bit more cautious against them because they've turned the ball over. They've made stops. You have to game plan a little bit more, cerebrally against these guys because you just can't just roll over them.
Yeah. I think it's going to be but they've still got their better offenses to play. Their schedule is rated the fourth toughest schedule, but honestly, I think South Carolina can go to Tennessee this weekend and win. I really do. I think Rattler now gives them they got some skill guys. I don't think they're that bad. Minnesota's loss at Northwestern was disgusting, and it hurts Carolina. App losing at Wyoming, they probably should have won the game, but Wyoming's not bad. That would have been a really good win if App got that. I think moving forward, they deemed those teams to do better. But so far, I would say that they have not played the last three games. They have not played dynamic offenses, and they have not played very good quarterbacks. So let's see moving forward, the kind of QBs they're going to have to deal with coming up is going to challenge them a little bit more. So in a month, when we do one of these, we'll talk about the defense and we'll see where they are in relationship to all the things we're talking about.
AJ, if you're talking about national perception, I don't think anything that has been played to this point is going to matter. I think the Carolina's identity and the Carolina narrative for the national media is going to be formed against Miami, against Clemson, and against Duke, because those are the teams that that matter. Those are the three best teams that they're going to play. I think everything up until now is just get it done. Just don't stumble, because those are the games that are going to determine how you're perceived. Now, as far as, the challenge involved, you want to make sure that you shore up everything against these teams, because again, like you said, the toughest tests are to come. And oh, by the way, in addition to those three games, there's a certain team that at the end of the schedule that always plays out of its gourd against Carolina. So, regardless of what their record is, and I think last year is the evidence on that, you're going to get a real game against these guys.
Yeah, I think the trip to Georgia Tech's going to be a lot tougher than people think.
And yeah, they're not a bad team.
I think of the two Brents that took over programs last year, one before the season, one during the season, I think the Brent down in Atlanta appears to have things going better than the Brent in Blacksburg.
Of course, he was a lot better prepared for it than the other Brent in I
think so too. Yeah.
Hokie land. So, yeah.
And also, very quickly, we're going long here, but I think people would be cool with that. If they do win those games you're talking about, and people start going back and they really start examining the schedule, they're going to look in September. North Carolina had 3 wins over Power Fives, one on a neutral site, one on the road, and they were by an average of 16.3 points. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, they allowed 2 field goals in the second half to their offenses. I think that they've done enough that when people, because right now people are sort of fixated, you beat a G5 in double overtime at home. Unfortunately, nobody really quite understands the dynamics of playing Appalachian State, which is why Carolina should never play them.
No, all 3 of those games in that series came down to the last play or overtime.
Exactly.
So yeah,
exactly. But they should never play them because they dropped and people, App State, they don't. Mm-hmm. You can only carry that Michigan effect for so long, but they're going to look good when people start parsing this team later on if they continue this. I think that they're set up pretty well, Brett. I really do. I think Absolutely. They have a chance. I think they have a chance to be a significant part of the conversation in November.
I always thought when I looked at this schedule to begin with, if they can survive the first 4 games, they're going to go into those last 3 games with something to, something of there for them to take. I've adjusted a little bit because Pitt has been a massive disappointment. So the Miami game now replaces that Pitt game. So if they can get past that Miami game now, they are set up to do something extremely special if they can close out a season better than they did last year. And oh, by the way, going to Death Valley now doesn't quite seem as imposing as it did about 4 weeks ago, does it? So,
they lose a couple. You know how it is there. I covered a lot of games when I was at Fox.
I was there last
week. A lot of games there. And if it's not a big game and the fans don't think they have an national, those corners can be empty sometimes.
Well, let me tell you, last week I was there at that game.
And by the way, they have great fans. Before I get the crap from people, they have great fans. I love it down there. It's nothing to me is more enjoyable in football than them getting. I love the bus, the cameras on the bus, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that sometimes in a group like this with. By the time Carolina gets there, they may not be frothing at the mouth too much.
No, and let me just tell you, from being there last week, that place was electric when they sent that kid out there to kick what they thought was going to be the winning field goal. And when he missed, it's just amazing how the air got sucked out of that place. And I turned to Andrea Adelson, who was sitting next to me, and I said, Florida State's going to win this game because you could just kind of feel the nervousness, that trepidation in the crowd. And the crazy thing is, how at Clemson after the games, they meet at the paw. Well, because they let the fans on the field and everybody mingles and everything. Well, after that overtime loss, I would say as many people were heading for the exits as they were for the paw. And there's a palpable sense of dread right now in that program, at least surrounding that program. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle it.
Well, Dabo has so often had the magic potion, but he really, I don't want to say screwed the pooch on that, but he didn't have the magic potion and he was desperate and it backfired. It's a bad look.
He's coaching. He's coaching in the 1990s still, and it's 2023.
Yeah. He needs to adapt. But that'll be another conversation for another day. One guy who has adapted, and he's 72 years old, is Mac Brown,
which is why he's in the Hall of Fame.
He's the personification of adapting, and he's got a damn good football team this year that I think has been at C+ level and is going to get better moving forward. You agree with that?
I think maybe B-. I think that they've been better than average. But yes, I do think that the ceiling is still a long way
for
away.
them. It's for them. I grade on a curve for each team. And I think for them, it's been about seeing the defense being what it's been against the P5s in the second half might move them to a B.
And that's where I'm going for it, because the offense still has so much more to go than the defense. Yeah. But but I just think that they've been, don't sell them short. I mean, I think that they're playing maybe at B- B level, but there's still room to go before they hit the ceiling.
Absolutely. Tell everybody again how they can find your stuff.
at BeFried ACC. That's BeFried ACC, or you can just go directly to SaturdayRoad.com.
Thank you to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this show, as they so often do. You guys will hear them over and over and over and over and over through the end of the football season because we have a wonderful relationship with them. He's Brett. I'm AJ. You never know. Maybe he's back next Friday. I'm going to have to start paying him to have him come back, but that might be worth it. So if you like this podcast, go ahead and click like, share it with your Carolina friends and your ACC friends, because we're talking ACC, because that's what Brett does and has done so well for 4 decades, maybe a little more than 4 decades.
No, it's been about 4 decades. Yeah.
4 decades. You don't want me to make you too old. Don't make you too old. Anyway, go find his stuff, guys. And he's an amazing follow on Twitter. One of the best Twitter follows you can possibly imagine in
You never know
region.
what stupid thing I'm going to say.
Absolutely. When he's got a problem with the HOA where he lives, Brett's going to let you know about
or
it.
Or if somebody ruins my order in the fast food place, yeah.
Absolutely. God, that is great stuff. Anyway, appreciate it, my friend.